You know the story, right? The twin brothers Romulus and Remus left to die, but saved by a she-wolf. They grow up and found the city of Rome. I mean, it's one of the greatest founding myths ever. But what if I told you that behind that epic tale of gods, wolves, and a pretty serious sibling rivalry, the real story is actually way more interesting?
So let's just get right into it, because this is the big one. It's the question historians have been wrestling with for, well, centuries. What if the story we all learned is just a story? What does the actual physical evidence tell us about how Rome really got its start? And look, this legend is absolutely incredible. To give themselves an even more epic backstory, the Romans eventually traced their origins all the way back to the Trojan hero Aeneas, who managed to escape the burning city of Troy. This move connected them directly to the great Greek myths, giving them this heroic, almost divine pedigree. So the traditional story is just so neat and tidy. It gives us a very precise date, a clear founder in Romulus, and this clean line of 7 kings that ends with a huge dramatic revolution. But you have to get this. For the Romans, this wasn't just some boring history lesson. This was their identity. This was the story that told them, from the very beginning, that they were destined for greatness. Okay, but this is where the historical detective work really kicks in. Because as compelling as that story is, there's a huge problem. The people who first wrote it all down, they were doing it centuries after the events they were describing. There are no contemporary records, no diaries from King Romulus, you know? Now this slide, this really shows you the scale of the problem. We're talking about a gap of over 300 years. The period of the kings ends around 509 BC, right? But the first Roman historians, guys like Fabius Pictor, they didn't start writing until about 200 BC. Seriously, imagine trying to write a detailed history of the 1700s right now, using nothing but folklore and family stories passed down through generations. That's the challenge we're facing. And yeah, modern historians do not pull any punches here. As this quote makes crystal clear, the consensus today is that the traditional story is a myth. Not a lie, exactly, but a powerful national story that was created long after the fact. The hard evidence just isn't there to back it up. Okay, so if we set the legend aside for a minute, what can we actually piece together from the clues that do exist? This is where archaeology becomes our most important tool. We get to dig, literally, beneath the myths to find the physical reality of early Rome. And here's the crucial point. Rome wasn't founded in a single day by some legendary king. The archaeological record shows that the famous hills of Rome were actually home to a bunch of separate walled villages. The Romans called them oppida, basically hilltop forts. So it wasn't one city. It was more like a neighborhood of fortified villages. And this map shows you exactly why they were separate. You can see how the hills, the future heart of the city, they basically rise up like islands out of this swampy, marshy ground that would flood all the time. That geography is what kept them isolated from each other for so long. So how did these separate villages become one city? Well, it was a really slow process. Think of it in 3 steps. First, you have the villages, the oppida. Then, some of them form a religious league called the Septimontium, so they can celebrate festivals together. But the final, crucial step was creating a real political city, the city of 4 regions. This is when they marked out a sacred boundary, a line called the Pomerium that you could not cross with weapons. And it enclosed the hills, officially creating the very first Rome. All right, so we've got a city that grew over time, instead of being founded all at once. But what about its rulers? I mean, did Rome actually have kings? And if they did, what were they really like? The answer is yes, absolutely. The existence of the monarchy is pretty much beyond dispute. And the most compelling piece of evidence is the survival of the title rex, the Latin word for king, in a later religious office, the rex sacrorum, or king of sacred rites. This office stuck around long into the Republic, like a powerful historical fossil, proving that a real monarchy had once existed. But the kind of kingship they had was probably very different from the legend. The myth suggests this classic hereditary monarchy, father to son. The reality was likely something else entirely, an elective system where the king was chosen by the nobles from among their own ranks. It was a lot like what was happening in the early Greek city-states. And we also know for sure that Rome didn't develop in a vacuum. Its powerful northern neighbors, the Etruscans, had a huge impact. In fact, it's almost certain that the last kings of Rome were Etruscan. and they ruled the city during a period of Etruscan dominance. And boy, did they leave their mark on everything from official symbols and religious rituals to military tactics. But this era of kings, whether they were Latin or Etruscan, was not going to last forever. And how it all ended is just as important as how it began, because it would define Rome for the next 500 years.
The traditional number is 244 years. For almost 2.5 centuries, Rome was ruled by kings. Now, we can't be sure if that number is exact, but what it represents is a long, long era that was about to come to a very bloody, very decisive end.
So the key thing to get here is that the legends tell a simple story about one evil king. The reality? It was much bigger. This was a political revolution. This was the local Roman nobles kicking out a foreign dynasty and taking power for themselves.
And this brings us to our final and most important takeaway. The end of the kings wasn't a conclusion, it was the explosive birth of something totally new, the Roman Republic. This wasn't just Rome's first revolution, it was its most important one. It forged in them this deep, visceral hatred of the very idea of kingship that would shape their politics, drive their conquests, and ultimately lead them to build a massive empire, all to make absolutely sure that no single man would ever be king again.